Hi, my name is Placida Gallegos. I am a psychologist and organization development specialist. I am on the faculty at the Fielding Graduate University in Santa Barbara, and I'm an independent consultant affiliated with ICW Consulting out of Philadelphia. I think it's important to be optimistic, and I think, to have a positive message. But I think I read a statistic just recently that said 1 in 4 Hispanics lives in poverty. And so I think, those of us who have achieved, and I'd say everybody in the room, has extended and achieved so much more than the majority of people who are not here. So each one of us represents, people that are in prison, people that are dead, people that are starving, and so we have a huge responsibility, I think, to bring up that side as well. The people who didn't make it, the people who are being, really having, significant life issues, and so that, the poverty and the lack of education. We're one of the poorest educated groups in the country. In any organization that I go into, there's usually a large population of Hispanics at the bottom, so well represented in the field positions, in anything that deals directly out with the public, call centers, a lot of sort of what is more sort of factory type work. And usually when I talk to them, they think that all you have to do is keep your head down and do a good job. So they're very much worker bees, and that's kind of the part about the work ethic that we learn from our families, is hard work is what you need to do. And it's often not really, everybody has to work hard, but there's so many other factors that determine whether a person moves up in an organization. So there are a lot of things that we like to talk about as the sticky floor. You can talk about the glass ceiling, but it's a sticky floor so that you're not even getting close to the ceiling to even be able to break it. And so the further up you go, the more, the fewer and fewer people of color. Of those, you see more African Americans, fewer Latinas and Latinos. Asians, usually in different industries, are doing quite well. And women are making progress, but I think Latinos in general are not moving up into the executive roles. And when they do get close to that, then they are really have to minimize their differences. They have to really play down any of their differences in order to be successful, or at least that's basically what they experience, is a lot of constraints around, okay, you're here, but now we want you to act like us, be like us, think like us, talk like us. So I think in education, having a PhD myself, and some of my graduate students are here, but the number of Hispanic women, with PhDs is like 0.0005. It's you can count them on in a very small percentage. So doing things like doing research, I did my research 30 years ago on Latino managers in an organization, and because nobody cares. If we're not there to do the research, just like if we're not at the table when decisions are made in organizations, no one will raise these issues. And so I think it's, it is a pretty dismal, story. And again, I think it goes back to how we're socialized, which is to fit in, so we grow up in these fairly large families or extended families, and we learn that, you're just one of everybody, so don't differentiate, don't distinguish yourself from the group. And so sometimes when we move into positions that don't value Latinos, we tend to buy into some of that same negative message. We take in the negative messages about our own group, and we call it internalized oppression, which is I begin to believe the negative messages that are fed to me from the media, from the schools, from the churches, so all of that, gets internalized. And so I think African Americans, because of the particular way that they were, racism played out for them in terms of slavery and those it was more blatant than the kind of racism that Latinos have faced. And so, and then, Asians with Japanese were in internment camps, and, so there are different ways that they were oppressed. But the particular way that Latinos, and if you think of the Mexican Americans, we've been here for generations. So that we have recent immigrants as well as people, like my family from New Mexico, who have been there for generations. We were part of the Native Americans when the Spaniards came. So we're a product of the blending of the Spanish father, because the Spanish men only came as men. And so they intermarried, or however those joinings happened with the native women, and so we're a product of that mestizo, sort of environment. So our generosity of spirit, our willingness to accommodate other people, our kindness sometimes plays against us because we're not so willing to push back. And I think there's some skills that we haven't developed. That certainly African Americans, as leaders in the civil rights movement, and possibly because they can't pass. So there's a way that sometimes Latinos are like, if I keep my head down, especially if they're light-skinned, especially if they don't appear or don't have accents or things, we kind of buy into the fact that I can pass as long as I, don't identify myself, don't stick out, don't remind people that I'm different. And so we tend to try to operate that way, try to be nice, try not to make trouble. And there are times when we do have to use our voices, and we're not always, skilled at that. I think Asians do a lot of, mutual help. I mean, in terms of collaborating with each other in a much more quiet way, but they are definitely, in terms of making progress for the group, they tend to emphasize education. They tend to emphasize, some of the skills that they develop. So they gain access in a different way. So it's our strength that can become a weakness. The very gifts that we have as a group, we need to be more conscious of and then use more intentionally, and not just randomly. I'm going to be trusting everybody, or I'm going to be accommodating everyone. That there's a time to say no, and there's a time to set boundaries and use our voices to stand out. Well, I've recently completed a nationwide research project on Latinas and their careers, and talking to focus groups all across, in all the major cities, but including Minnesota and some other places, and asking them about their experiences. And so I think that it's interesting because many of them talked about their fathers. That their fathers were a significant influence on them, some positive and some negative. So some said, my father encouraged me, told me I could accomplish anything. And others said, my father said, you're only a woman, you're only going to have babies. But the role of the fathers were very important. And in terms of the sort of chauvinism in Latino culture, I want to start by saying there's chauvinism and there's sexism in all the cultures. Sure. So in white culture and in every culture, in the U.S., in Asian culture, in African American culture, there's sexism. And so I don't think, the whole idea of machismo and all that, it kind of gets put only on Latinos. So I want to say, that all the groups have a lot of work to do around gender issues. But I think for Latinos, there is a way, and, in Spanish they would call it the puta or the virgen, right? So women are either to be elevated as, saintly and therefore protected, or they're on the streets. And so, we go into organizations and people don't quite know what to do with us, because I think we do stand out. I have a particular bias that I think Latinas are some of the most beautiful women, in the world. And so I think people don't know what to do with us, and they have sort of a sexualized version of us. So if we're friendly, we're outgoing, there are ways that people don't know how to take that. And so I think there's a whole lot being missed that Latinas have to offer. So the women that I'm interviewing, talk about all of this, strengths and skills, but, coming up in very difficult environments, having to, and I think this is where it differentiates a bit from Hispanic men, is that they have to take care of the family, the kids, the grandmother, the grandparents, and, be everything at work. So they tend to have just a huge sense of responsibility. And so one of the questions that I asked them in these interviews is, I said, what about self-care? What about taking care of yourself? And there were always blank stares. And the women are like, me? I don't, it's not even on the list. And one woman said, well, let me think about it. She said, well, I ended up in the hospital. I got very sick. So that's what it took to get her attention about herself. Yeah. So it's a very extreme sense of generosity. Again, generosity, care for others, and very little emphasis on care for self. And then, and finally, I would say that a lot of these women talk about having to marry non-Latinos, because they found that Latinos might be intimidated by them as they move up the corporate ladder, or they make more money than their husband. They're afraid, I don't want to take another promotion because it's going to cause problems at home. And so there are ways that both the dominant culture and then within our culture, and so a lot of these women end up feeling like they don't belong anywhere. There's nowhere that because they don't belong in the community anymore. They've changed too much. They're too independent, and they get a lot of messages about that they, even from our mothers saying, why aren't you taking care of your kids? Or I was told, how can you travel so much and leave your daughter alone? And, not being a good mother, and at the same time at an organization where you're not allowed to be seen as a real leader and allowed to really use all the talents that you have. So it's very much an issue of talent, that our talent is just not being tapped as fully as it could be, and organizations can't afford that. Well, I think there is a fieriness about Latino culture that maybe we eat so much chili or something, I don't know. But, it's our food, our music, and I take it as, it's a sense of aliveness. I think there's an aliveness, a vitality that Latinos do have. But as I think about organizations, there's a lot of talk now about emotional intelligence. So they're taking managers and training them into being, emotionally intelligent. And I think that's part of what Latinos have, which is a range of expressiveness, ability to express a range of emotions, to pay attention to other people's emotions and respond. And so I think we have a lot of capacity around emotion that is contrary to what a lot of organizations have been oriented toward. So if you think, most organizations, most corporations were founded by white men who are very unemotional, very unexpressive, and so they're not comfortable with a lot of expression of emotion. And so it's a sort of, again, a question of fit in terms of how we, how we show up. So I think we have this sort of sense of passion. I think, I experienced this recently. I was doing a workshop in San Diego with a group, and they were primarily Asian managers. And they spoke in a very soft voice, and, it took a lot to draw them out because they were just very low key. So I felt like I had to turn myself way down. I just had to, calm myself down, not use so much, nonverbal expression. And so I felt like I had to modulate it. And I think that may be part of our work as Latinos, is to pay attention to what is the tolerance here, how can I be myself and bring my passion, but at the same time know your audience, and know that I'm always being myself. So I want to be authentic, but I'm going to be myself in this environment. It calls for something different. Focus strategically around what am I trying to accomplish here. And so I think there are ways that we need to be aware of who we are and how other people react to us. And some of it is their bias and their prejudices about us, but the reality is it's out there. And so depending on where we are, we have to be able to know who we are well enough to be able to use it, to manage it effectively, just like any other talent. I think this is where I really agree with what Glenn is saying around there's a window, that I think there's an urgency about it. Numbers alone aren't going to get it for us. So our numbers are, expanding. There was just something in the San Diego paper about all of the counties that are now majority Hispanic areas, but the numbers alone won't get it. It could be South Africa, right, where the vast majority of people were were black people, but they didn't rule. So it's about power, and I think it's about how we get access to power. And in terms of organizations, I think that there still is a sense that we are these vast numbers of people, but they don't connect that always with buying power and with our, kind of seeing us really as a serious market. And when they do see us as a market, they don't connect that to what's inside their organization, that the weight of that market is to have Latinos at the table, at the decision making in all departments, in all functions, to help them really be able to meet that, that market. I get excited about the, it's when we think about diversity and there's like all the groups are all blended together. And I think what needs to happen is more of a differentiated approach and a lot of organizations aren't willing to do this, to have a Hispanic initiative and say we are focused on Hispanics in particular, and there's, the case to be made for that. And then take the heat from other groups that are going to say, why are you focusing on Hispanics, and be able to articulate the case for that. And then grow Hispanic managers intentionally as a resource. I think like with the affirmative action process that was, back in my day in the 70s, I think it got misrepresented as something we need to do to help those people. So they want to help Hispanics. And that's not in the business environment, that doesn't work. And so a lot of organizations didn't realize how Hispanics help them, how they need us. And so I think that's the case to be made, and we're going to have to make it. I mean, I think we're going to have to demonstrate ways that we offer value to the organization, but do it our own way, and so we've got to fight the fight of not blending in, not assimilating, not losing who we are, but we have to perform. We have to overperform. We have to prove ourselves, and we can't afford to be average in our performance anywhere. We have to be outstanding, because you're going to be looked at and you're going to be under a microscope all the time, and your faults will be amplified, and so it's just a reality.